Your next talk today comes from Sophie Dennis. Sophie is a strategy consultant and coach, and at the moment is currently helping transform access to NHS digital services in the UK. Now, in this talk, she's going to be discussing user-centered digital strategy and how you can apply it to your business to make the wheels turn faster. Enjoy the session.
Hi, I'm Sophie Dennis. I'm a strategic design consultant. I'm currently working with NHS Digital on transforming access to digital health services, but I spent over 20 years really leading ambitious user research, design and discovery programs, defining digital strategies for major public and third sector organisations, and building high-performing teams able to deliver high-quality, user-centred digital services at pace. And today I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things. We're going to look at what is strategy and why it matters. And then we're going to look at the key elements of good strategy, regardless of context, whether you're working on a product strategy, on content strategy, brand strategy, or organisational strategy. When I do talks and workshops on strategy, the thing that comes out time and time again is that people get promoted to a more strategic role or tasked with coming up with a strategy, but they don't really know what that means or where to start. Strategy is simply not something that most people get taught. It's a word that gets thrown around without anyone being clear what it means or how it differs from things like a vision or simply having a plan. Few people really teach strategy except at a very high business level, and they're certainly not teaching it to designers and developers. So what I'm going to do in this keynote is really just demystify strategy a bit. I'm going to give you a clear, straightforward definition of what strategy actually is, that you can use as a framework to keep on track. We'll look at a famous example of strategy and how that stacks up against a definition of good and bad strategy. And finally, we'll look at why strategy matters, even or perhaps most especially in agile, fast-moving environments. I hope you'll come away with a really solid foundation to think about how you can be more strategic in your work, whether that's a role you're in right now or something you want to develop into in future. I started talking about strategy because I think strategy gets a really bad rap. It's seen as long, waffly documents, pointless executive away days, and a lot of blue skies pontificating that frankly just gets in the way of getting stuff done. I think this attitude arises for two reasons: a misunderstanding of what strategy actually is, and too much exposure to bad strategy. So let's have a look at what strategy is and how to distinguish between good and bad strategy. Peter Drucker once said, "There is surely nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency what should not be done at all." There is a risk, even in the most well-functioning agile team, that while you're making lots of progress, it's not really clear how that progress is adding up to something bigger. Sometimes it's said the problem with agile is it doesn't have a brain. An analogy that I really like is one I picked up from one of the Redgate design teams a few years ago. He talked about how agile could be like swimming without goggles on. We swim, 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 you sprint, 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 and sooner or later you smack into the wall, you look up, and you wonder what the hell this thing is that you've built. A huge amount of time and energy applied with great efficiency, but not ultimately adding up to a great deal. You've been delivering value, yes, but were you delivering the most value you could with the resources that you've got? Strategy is how we avoid this. It's how we know we're working on the right things and not, as Peter Drucker says, simply doing with great efficiency what should not be done at all. At its simplest, strategy is about answering 5 simple questions. Where are we going? What will be different when we get there? Where are we now? How are we going to get from here to there? And finally, what might stop us and how might we overcome that? Being strategic is often as simple and as hard as taking a step back and answering these questions. And really importantly, you can ask these questions and you can start being strategic about your work, regardless of what you are working on or the level you are at in your organisation. You can ask them at a really broad, overall business strategy level, but they're equally valid in narrower fields. And I think this is really important Strategy is not something that just happens in the boardroom. These questions of where are we going, how will we get there, how will getting there be better can exist at many levels, and you will almost always benefit from being able to answer them. There's a cascade down from top-level business strategy to strategies for tackling particular elements of that, brand strategy, product strategy, technology, each one feeding goals down into the next. The overarching where we are going down to the level below. So what looks like tactics at one level may be strategy for the next. It's how we know we're working on the right things in the right way and collectively working towards a larger goal. So why does strategy have such a bad rap? I think it's quite simple. There is too much bad strategy out there. Because most people aren't taught strategy, or possibly because they're taught it really badly, a lot of what's classed as for strategy ends up something like this. Our strategy is collaborative growth. We will lead a customer-focused effort of the market through our use of digital business and Internet of Things ecosystem to build a cloud-based revolution. By being both innovative and open, we will drive competitive advantage throughout the organisation. Synergies between our data leaders and agile culture, and to be honest, I lost the will to live when it got to the word synergies. Because this is just bad. It's a bunch of bloviating nonsense and current buzzwords and big words intended to make the writer look clever. And that's not just a problem for this strategy, right? It's a problem because when you look around for models and what you should be doing when you're asked to be more strategic or to write a strategy, a lot of the stuff you'll find is like this. And it's really no help at all. There is some small pieces of good news. First, this is a joke. The frightening thing is it does sound exactly like the kind of stuff an organisation might actually publish and call it a strategy. The other piece of good news is, of course, if you've been asked to write a strategy and what passes for strategy in your organisation is something like this, you're sorted. You can head over to strategymadlibs.herokuapp.com, hit refresh a few times till you get one you like, copy and paste into your document, job done, put your feet up for the rest of the week. If, however, you'd like to avoid coming up with this sort of nonsense, I'm going to share with you a little framework to help you sniff out exactly what kind of bad strategy that you're looking at. I think of them as little smell tests for things that call themselves strategy but really aren't, and for identifying what is missing. I call them the "yeah right" test, the "so what" test, and the "yes and" test. The "yeah right" test is a lofty goal or aspiration presented as strategy. Let's face it, a lot of corporate vision and mission statements fall heavily into "yeah right." There's a lot of lofty talk, words like the best, world leading, innovation is undoubtedly in there somewhere, all while churning out the same slightly mediocre, safe solutions that you've always done. They fail the "yeah right" test because no one actually believes the organisation is committed or capable of doing what it takes to achieve the vision. And that's fatal. If no one believes the goal can be reached, they're not even going to try. It can also be part of a lack of a coherent plan to achieve the vision or failure to appreciate the complexity or scale of the task. You may be familiar with language like this. Cornwall is going to be the next Silicon Valley. Now, I lived in Devon for 6 years and I love you all. But there was honestly just the most ridiculous amount of this kind of silly hype from people who frankly should know better. And it just makes you look naive. It fails to correctly diagnose the problem or to properly understand the reality of the situation, both what enabled Silicon Valley to become what it is today, or the real barriers to growing successful digital businesses in the far southwest of England. In this case, failing the "yeah right" test robs you of credibility and means no one's going to take your proposal seriously. The so what test is kind of the opposite. It's tactics or a solution with no clear picture of how everything will be better once it's delivered. There's two kinds of strategy you probably see like this. There's what I think of as the Christmas tree strategy. Big 5-year organisational plans are particularly prone to this kind of effect because they're tied to budget. So everyone comes along with their pet idea and they try to attach it to the strategy Christmas tree. And they also come along and try to get anything they don't like taken out because they don't like Sandra over in marketing. And the thing you're left with is, at best, something pretty anodyne. It's a list of sensible things you should probably be doing. At worst, though, it is a waste of the time and energy that have been spent creating and writing this strategy. And I think that's the real danger of your Christmas tree strategy, is that writing a strategy like this that keeps everyone happy takes a long time. You can spend years waiting for the strategy to arrive, during which everyone continues to run around doing, if you're lucky, with great efficiency, what should not be done at all. There's another kind of strategy that fails the so what test. This is what I call the shiny things strategy. So these are perhaps a little bit out of fashion now, but a few years ago, launching a mobile app was definitely what passed for a lot of organisations' mobile strategy. I'm going to let you in a secret. Apps are not a strategy. Adopting whatever this year's cool piece of technology is classic shiny things, so what strategy. They are solutions in search of user problems. Here's another perhaps more controversial example. Digital transformation. Seriously, digital transformation is not in and of itself a strategy. Your organisation might very well need it, but it's not a strategy unless you can clearly articulate why you need to become digital, whatever the hell that means, what will be different once you've transformed, and what exactly it is about your legacy IT estate or ways of doing business that's stopping you and needs to change. Other things that are not a strategy. Wearables, chatbots, AI, personalisation, a new logo, a rebrand, content marketing, agile, user experience, lean UX, service innovation, on and on and on. All these things are a means to an end or a method for achieving a goal. They are not the goal in and of themselves. They might be things a strategy recommends you do or invest in. You might need a strategy to implement them, but they do not in and of themselves represent a strategy. Unless you are clear about why you are doing these things and how they will help you achieve your goal, you don't have a strategy. You have some initiatives and a few hand-wavy slogans to make everybody feel better. Many of them fail the so what test, in that it's not clear what they'll achieve or the problem they're intended to solve. And if they manage to pass the so what test, then they quite possibly fail the last of our tests, the yes and test. Yes and are goals with no solution or plan. Unlike the yeah right test, the goal isn't just some ridiculous, unachievable aspiration. But the risk here is you get everybody fired up and they all go off and they run around and there's a great deal of noise, a whole load of activity, and not really anything much getting done. I think you could argue that things like digital transformation, innovation, adopting user-centred service design methods are more of a yes and than a so what. Yes, our long-established high street banks, most of our public sector institutions need a good dose of user-centred digital transformation if they are to survive in the 21st century. But it is not enough for these organisations to say they're going to do digital transformation or be more innovative. They don't need buzzwords and slogans. They need a clear blueprint for what being digital means for them and a realistic, coherent plan to achieve that change. Too much of what passes for strategy fails one of these three tests. And if you fail one of these three tests, then I'd argue you don't have a strategy. You might call it a strategy. It might have strategy on the title page, but it's not a strategy. Or, if we're being slightly generous, it's a bad strategy, which is unlikely to deliver the results you're hoping for. So fun as it is to mock the fluff and waffle that pastors for strategy, let's turn our attention to the real question. What makes a good strategy? After going through my 3 tests, ranting a bit about things that are not a strategy and why they're not a strategy, I've come to this definition. Strategy is a coherent plan to achieve a goal that will deliver significant positive change. Let's break this down a bit. A strategy should be about changing something. You need a strategy because you want or need something to be different in the world. Strategy is about addressing the problems and obstacles that are preventing that change from happening now. It's how you pass the so what test. What is going to be different, and how are things going to be better as a result of doing this? Secondly, strategy should achieve a goal. This is the end state that you're aiming at, something concrete and tangible. Amorphous goals like digital transformation are out. The other key here is the achievability aspect. It must be realistic that by following the plan, the goal can be reached. If not, you're failing the "here right" test. It's simply not realistic to expect Cornwall to be the new Silicon Valley. This is what distinguishes a strategic goal from visions and mission statements. However, crucially, it doesn't mean that it lacks ambition. Let's take a look at possibly one of the most famous strategies of the 20th century, President Kennedy's ambition to land a man on the moon. And I like looking at this example because when we talk about taking a moonshot, what we usually mean is a big, ambitious goal with a slim chance of success, little idea of how it can be achieved, but the possibility of a big payoff. It's almost the definition of failing the "here right" test. But in fact, this wasn't really the case. Kennedy's 1961 speech is in fact an almost perfect case study in good strategy. Firstly, Kennedy's most famous objective was also concrete and tangible: to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade is out. It's almost a poster child for a smart goal. It's time limited. We all know what our definition of done is. We can write out our acceptance criteria on our user story card, give that to NASA, proper job. Return him safely to Earth. No good if we lose them in the middle. So it's really clear what success looks like. It's tangible and concrete in a way win the space race, for example, is not. Secondly, Kennedy's moonshot was achievable. He said, "We have examined where we are strong and where we are not, where we may succeed and where we may not. We possess all the resources and talents necessary." Before giving this speech, he had spent some weeks and months sitting with his science advisors to understand where we were in terms of achieving ambitions to put men into space. And there were engineering challenges. There were things people still didn't quite know how to do. But the basic science was really well understood. And they had broken it down into this series of engineering challenges which needed to be solved. And they had identified that the biggest barrier was a wholehearted commitment to that singular goal and concentrating resources and time on fulfilling it. In this way, Kennedy's moonshot also tackled the third part of our definition of good strategy. Strategy should be coherent. It needs a coherent plan for how you'll achieve your goal. And this is how you pass the yes and test. By coherent, I'm talking about something that is logical and consistent and forms a unified whole. Your strategy must present a logical, rational plan for achieving the goal. That means you must take a clear-headed look at the likely problems, answer objections and difficulties take on barriers, and talk about how to address them, at least at a high level. Again, this is what distinguishes strategy from vision or a mission statement. In the moonshot speech, Kennedy presents a clear plan of attack. New lunar spacecraft, more powerful rocket engines, unmanned missions, hundreds of millions of dollars, $531 million in fiscal 62, $7 to $9 billion over the next 5 years. In this way, Kennedy's moonshot passes the yes and test. Yes, we can all get behind the idea of putting a man on the moon. How cool is that? But Kennedy doesn't just have a dream. He also has a plan. And he is also really clear about the obstacles facing his goal of putting a man on the moon. It will take many years. It will cost a lot of money. It will require a degree of dedication and organisation that, let's face it, is not always present in government work. And there are risks, inflated costs, interagency rivalries, and high staff turnover. All this will be hard. And so he is clear. There is no sense in agreeing or desiring that the United States take an affirmative position in outer space unless we are prepared to do the work and bear the burdens to make it successful. If we are to go only halfway or reduce our sights in the face of difficulty, in my judgment, it would be better not to go at all. Kennedy's speech passes the yes and test. And by being clear on the obstacles and his formula for overcoming them, it also passes the yeah right test. Kennedy sets out his case that it is practical and achievable to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth, if the country is single-minded in pursuit of that aim. In this way, Kennedy's plan represents a unified whole. He sets out a few key principles: the goal itself, designed to establish the US's supremacy in space, the idea that only committing to the plan, by going all in, can the difficulties be overcome. These are the big, unifying ideas behind the moonshot strategy. This is what you're seeking, really, when doing strategy. There is a moment when it all snaps together into a kind of aha realization of this is the thread that we can put through this to bind us together through these difficulties over potentially quite a long period of time to come together to achieve this goal and to achieve the change that we want to see in the world. I sometimes think of good strategy as having an inevitability to it. Often you find that when you set out your challenge and the context, the plan you propose should seem almost inevitable. One of the best moments I had when doing strategic work was when we presented the work back to the sort of informal board that the client had put together. And one of them said, "I don't like it, but I can't argue with it." He couldn't argue with the logic and consistency and the vision. He didn't like what it meant for his part of the business, but he could see that this was what they needed to pursue to achieve the change they had all agreed was needed. He was kind of like, he didn't have a basis to argue with it. He was like, fine, I'll get on board. I'll fit in with this strategy. That sense of, now you put it that way, of course that's what we should do, is your ultimate goal to judge a piece of good strategy. It's not easy to achieve. It won't happen every time. Not everybody is prepared to put aside their own interests, their own part of the organisational ego to say, fine, I'll get on board, I'll fit in with this. There will be lots of people who will carry on arguing with it until they're blue in the face, but you will take enough people with you to achieve change. Most importantly, this unifying idea provides one of the most valuable aspects of a good strategy: focus and leverage. The unifying idea is how good strategy gives us focus, and through that focus enables us to leverage our time and effort to greater effect. Part of that aha moment in identifying the approach that will achieve maximum impact is finding this unifying idea. It's what makes something a strategic solution rather than a bunch of tactics. Rather than picking off the problems in our user journey one by one, a tactical approach. Instead, we find the approach that will tackle a whole bunch of problems all at once. In this way, we can find leverage. When we pull it all together, leverage it up makes the great whole greater and more valuable than the sum of its parts. Just having value isn't enough. The strategy helps us ask, is this the most valuable thing we could be doing with our time and energy? It focuses our resources in a way that magnifies their effects, helping us reach ambitious goals and achieve significant change. So Kennedy's moonshot is a coherent plan to achieve a goal that will lead to significant positive change. It sets out how the country can focus its efforts on maximum impact. A strategy that meets this definition unlocks all kinds of good stuff. Good strategy helps us make decisions. Does what we're doing align with the strategy? If yes, great. Go ahead, do it, keep doing it. If no, stop. Don't do it. Like I said, just having value isn't enough. Is this the most valuable thing we could be doing with our time and energy? Second, good strategy gives us purpose. We know why we're doing these things and the benefit it will bring. We understand how our work fits into a larger whole. And that's particularly useful if what we're working on is either quite small or perhaps in and of itself quite tactical. It helps keep motivation up if we see how what we're doing is a building block or a stepping stone to something bigger. There's a lovely story of when Kennedy was touring the facilities at NASA and he ran into a janitor and he asked the man, "What are you doing?" And the man said, "I'm putting a man on the moon." That janitor understood how his work was contributing, albeit in a small way, to achieving this amazing thing. Thirdly, good strategy helps us delegate control and decision making. When everyone is really clear on the goal and roughly how you're planning to get there, it becomes much easier to push day-to-day decision-making down to the individuals and teams who are really close to the problem and give them true autonomy over their work and what they're doing. In this way, a good strategy can actually make an organisation more agile. Good strategy is exactly what enables teams to have autonomy over their work while being confident that what they are doing fits into the larger whole. It's how you know all those little increments add up to a coherent whole and that you're delivering the most value with the resources that you have. You may not be trying to go to the moon, but you still need a coherent plan to achieve a goal that will lead to significant positive change. You still need to be able to answer those 5 core questions. Where are we going? What will be different when we get there? Where are we now? How are we going to get from here to there? And what might stop us? And how will we overcome that? One final thing. Strategy is something you have, not something you write. Your strategy doesn't have to be a piece of comprehensive documentation that takes 6 months or 12 months or longer to produce. It can be stickers, it can be posters, it can and should be present in constant conversations. You can and should make your strategy agile. Thank you very much. You've been talking about strategy with me, Sophie Dennis. Like I said at the beginning, I'm a strategic design consultant. That means I help organisations develop user-centred digital strategies that put users at the heart of what they're doing. And I also coach and lead user-centred design teams. Right now I am taking on a few new consulting and coaching clients. So if you'd like to get in touch, you can reach me through LinkedIn, through Twitter, and my email address is right there on the screen as well. There's loads that I couldn't fit into a short half-hour keynote about how to approach strategy from a user-centred perspective. So here are also a few other resources you might want to check out, or do get in touch if you'd like me to run a seminar or workshop for your group or organisation. I am working on doing that well remotely. The book I recommend that you start with is Richard Ramalt's excellent Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which has lots more examples and advice on good versus bad strategy. There is also an extended version of this slide deck on Twitter, which goes into a lot more detail on how to tackle strategic work from a user-centered perspective. And finally, if you're up for more video content, a recording of my keynote on the art of things not done, developing a product strategy with story mapping and the Kano model from UX Scotland last year is also available online on Vimeo. If you just Google Art of Things Not Done UX Scotland, I'm sure you'll get to it. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've had a brilliant conference. Do get in touch with any questions through social media, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye.